afternoon, class. I wanted to share with you a little bit about these two chapters that we're covering this week. The psychological impact of injury. Those of you who came to hear my friend Paul Irway speak were able to get firsthand witness as to an example of an injured person that goes through these different stages. So the stages of grief, the theory is that when an athlete is injured, that individual goes through the same stages of grief as a person who actually lost a loved one. And so Paul shared in his car accident, which left him paralyzed, kind of the process that he went through. And if you can remember that, it helps to remember those stages that you will see again on the final exam. So the first stage is denial. When he first had his accident, he really was in denial that he had injured himself that badly. The doctor that came in and said, "Look, you broke your back. You're going to be in a wheelchair the rest of your life, and so just deal with it." And so he was stunned because he was a horse rider trainer, and he was furious, and so that anger kicked in. So denial, then anger. The rehab doctor heard what a tough time he's having, and he came in later and he said, "Look, you still have a year to get some feeling back, so why don't we in the meantime get you down to rehab, start to stretch out your legs and everything so that when that spinal compression doesn't exist and you heal, you'll be that much more prepared to actually walk again." So he was bargaining with him. Paul said, "I never changed a bit," so he lied to me. But that bargaining at least got him out of bed, into the wheelchair, down to rehab. And then when nothing ever changed and there were some really, really dark days as he was learning to adapt to a wheelchair and given up so many things that he loved in his previous life, he did go through depression. And there were 3 times that he said if he had a gun, he's not sure that he would have been with us. But he's past all that now and has then the final stage, acceptance and reorganization. He actually is a wheelchair marathoner, has written a book, so he's an author, has a fantastic job, great family. But that final stage is acceptance and reorganization. So just know those stages. So if I were to ask you what's the 3rd stage or whatever, that you would know that. Then into burnout and overtraining. And I do want to mention that the more tense you are and the more that you're burned out, the more likely it is that you will incur an injury. And so that's really important. So let's look, if this is in your text on page 509. And it's Smith's 4-stage model of burnout, cognitive affective stress model by Smith. In the very first stage, this is dubbed as situational demands. You can even think about this when it comes to school with the demands if you have a big test or if you go to take your LSAT test. But let's just say, for instance, with sport. So in all sports, there is a demand, a pressure that's placed on an athlete because they're expected to perform well. But it's not the pressure itself that causes a problem, but how we perceive it. And so the second stage is cognitive appraisal, the way you think through it. 2 equally trained athletes can go to the exact same competition. One views it as a threat to their egos. They're tense and they're nervous, and a lot of bad things happen physically and psychologically, but they have assessed this is a negative environment, where somebody else feels butterflies in their stomach, heart racing, but they anticipate growth and a challenge, and it makes them feel fully alive. So they're viewing it, perceiving it not as a threat to their ego, but instead as an opportunity for personal growth. So based on your perception or that cognitive appraisal, next comes the physiological and or psychological responses. So if you have perceived this situation, these demands, to be a threat and something that's going to be harmful for the way that people will judge and evaluate you. Of course, you have physical responses and your muscles tense up, stomach in knots, negative things, and also psychologically. something happens. So we have physical and psychological responses to whatever that perception is. And then lastly, behavioral responses. So this just means do you withdraw totally from the sport because you can't take the pressure anymore? You have a suboptimal performance, but that final and fourth stage is behavioral responses. And then I just want to mention also entrapment theory. It's just like it sounds. You feel trapped. So when an athlete doesn't want to compete anymore, doesn't want to be an athlete, but they're going to lose their scholarship, their coaches and their peers and their parents are going to be mad at them. They feel like they're stuck. I still have to keep doing this and I hate it. And so this is called entrapment theory. So just wanted to bring up those because those will be some of the things that you'll see again. And then on page 517, it lists some of the signs and symptoms if a person's overtrained or they're burned out. So when you're overtrained, obviously you begin to have poor performances, you're lethargic, you usually have sleep disturbances, mood changes, muscles are even more tense, you experience a lot of muscle tension and soreness. Usually you start to lose concentration and focus. Your blood pressure and resting heart rate elevated. A lot of times these athletes, these individuals have overuse injury and they usually lose their appetite. Some of the symptoms of burnout, you lose a lot of energy, you lose motivation, you again have trouble concentrating and sleep disturbance. Sometimes substance abuse comes into play then. Sometimes even to an extreme, your whole values and belief system turned upside down. You feel emotionally isolated. You have a lot of highs and lows. Your anxieties increase. But there's a lot of examples of all that in this back part of the chapter, so you might want to take a look at that. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I did post a little example of what you'll see when you do the Hallmark psychological skills assessment. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.